kids, this is Trish, and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today we have a super exciting guest named Mr. Kramer, and he is a new teacher from the Netherlands. This is my very first interview with somebody outside of America, so I am so excited to hear all about teaching in the Netherlands. What surprised you the most about being a new teacher? Did you expect some of the challenges that you would face? Did it go pretty smoothly? What was your overall experience like?
What surprised me is how easily you can disappear in front of a group of people. And I would suppose this would go for anyone, your initial instinct, I guess, when you're in front of a group of people is that they're all going to be looking at you. That may be true for the first 5 minutes, but then you find out pretty quickly that they're mostly interested in each other. So if you do not keep them engaged somehow, you can literally just walk out of there and they won't even notice. That was surprising in the beginning, how you can just vanish in front of a group of people. Luckily, the school I was doing my internship was really much, it was aligned with my University of Amsterdam. So they were used to having these new teachers every once in a while. So it wasn't that strange to them that they suddenly had this guy that was kind of looked like them, but a little older, a little more gray. They'd seen that before, so that made it, I suppose, a safer environment for a teacher to start out. So I did notice that they were more understanding, and at that particular school, I wasn't tested out as much as would happen later. But it gave me a great opportunity to kind of develop my own style, and this is one of the, and luckily I was already armed with some of the advice. And I think you even mentioned some of this thing, don't try to be the cool teacher, for instance, which I think for a lot of new teachers, that's kind of tempting, especially if you're younger and you think, well, when you see all these older teachers, I'm more in the know of, what's part of the new generation, and you're kind of a little closer to their generational culture, if you will. But I think the biggest thing that you have to really learn kind of by doing it is that they do want an authority figure ultimately at the end of the day. And I was very lucky in that sense too, that this was a school where that that idea of authority was ingrained in the culture. So call the teacher sir, all of that, just respect for the authority figure was part of the school culture. And that is something I do think that's essential for any educational system to work, because I wasn't sure what I would have enjoyed being a teacher. Maybe you have this idolized idea of okay, what kind of teacher am I ultimately going to be, but I think whatever type of teacher you want to be, at the end of the day, you have to be a figure of authority, and you actually have to be comfortable with that position.
Definitely.
So
what's the age range of the kids that you teach? Are they like teenagers, or how old are they?
I started with the teenagers, but I've had every age range as part of my training as well, because if you study at a university, you have to be able to teach from 13 to 18, and the program had a component where you have to do this many hours teaching this age range and this many hours teaching the older students. And let's say the last 4 months or so, I've been mostly teaching the 16 to 18 range. But now I'm filling in for a colleague who's doing the 13 to 15. So that's all I'm doing right now. And it's quite a switch, but because of my training, I was able to already build kind of an arsenal of my own materials for all of these different age ranges. And initially I thought okay, teaching the younger kids, this stuff is going to be so simple, it's probably going to bore me out of my mind. But what I've noticed, and this is also, you have to keep things fun for you as well, because they immediately can tell if you're just going through the motions. So if you're not present, you can't expect them to be excited if you're not excited. So I've kind of integrated my background in animation, video editing into my own curriculum. So some of it is pretty silly, but for instance, with the youngest kids, what I like to do is that sometimes in the middle of the class, my cat calls me on Skype. So I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, I got to take this call right now. It's just I got a friend who does the voice of the cat. And whatever she tells some cat-like story, but there's always some sort of grammatically incorrect sentence in there. She's a cat, so not everything that she says is entirely grammatically correct. Whenever I go to this it's almost like a play in a sense. The cat hangs up at some point, and then see, wait, what did she just say? And then they'll pick up on, the grammatic concept for that day. It's very simple. Something the difference between much and many. Whatever it may be, they're kind of presented in and that's kind of more of a theatrical way to do things. I mean, that works for the younger kids. I mean, but that's just an example of how I like to sometimes keep it exciting for me as well.
So a lot of people are going to want to know, how is the behavior of Dutch students? Do they have a lot of manners, and are they taught to respect authority, or do you ever have behavior or discipline problems?
The school where I started out in my internship had a very polite culture already ingrained in the school culture. And you do notice that, when you as a school spend some time just, on manners, how do we talk to each other here? Who's the authority figure? How do you address them? That's going to produce good results, that people will actually acknowledge authority, and it becomes almost like a self-regulating organism. Because that's what we do around here. The Dutch, I mean, we ourselves are very direct, as you will probably notice if you visit here. That is kind of just part of the overarching culture, directness. But that's not necessarily impoliteness, I would say. The kids will still, question why you're doing things a certain way, and they won't hesitate to let you know if something is not to their liking. But it can still be very, they'll still call you the appropriate, they'll still address you appropriately, but they'll still be direct. So far I've been very lucky with having worked at schools where it is just part of the culture, the way they do things there. So I haven't really, I've had terror classes for sure, but overall the kids that I've taught so far have been, very respectful. But, I know if I'm getting ahead of things here, but the school I worked before, the one I'm working at right now, I did have a class there that was like a 14 to 15 year range class. That was just horrifying. That was a straight out war. So we're talking about where I just could not establish myself as an authority figure. That was probably the worst that I've seen in terms of behavior. And that was more like this was just a group of vultures, essentially, waiting to strike every time. And that was doing a number on my mental health as well. And just to the way things ended at that school for me is that one day they being the principal and someone from the English department sat me down kind of unexpectedly. And this was someone who wasn't even supposed to be in there this day, so I was like, okay, where's this going? They asked me a very existential question, which is, does this make you happy? And wow. I was like, as the flakes of skin were still coming from my hair, all the stress. It was very hard to lie at that moment. So I said, no, this is horrible. I was just surviving that because it wasn't fun, because there was no mutual respect, or there was no good relationship between me and that class. It was just that of, I'm going to try to do this. Well, we're going to try to do this. This is a class where if I walked out of the classroom and I came back, the door would be locked. That would give you an idea of the level of respect there. So that pretty much ended with me being told that that was my last day. I was relieved of my duties, which
I'm sorry
is I think, and it was health-wise a good decision on their end to be fair to them. Because it did immediately alleviate all that pressure that had been on me at that time. Like, I'm freed from this burden. Never really worried about finding a job because it's pretty, it's high in demand. But definitely like, okay, I'm not going to make the same mistakes again. And I think in this case, the biggest mistake that I made was starting with a contract that was actually too large for me to take on. I would advise starting teachers to not jump in, the 16 or 20, hour weeks right away. See what you can handle and just build slowly, because essentially I think teaching is in a sense a spiritual practice that does a great number on you as a because all your facets of who you are come into play. If you're having a bad time but you have to teach, what energy are you bringing into the classroom? So keep time aside always to reflect on the performance and how you're doing. If you take on too many, if you're always just, well, I still got to grade all of this and prepare this, but you don't have time to reflect or just relax or whatever and lose touch with that, that personal aspect of it, you're heading towards burnout pretty quickly. So that's what I learned from that experience. It was the right decision for them. But from what I understand, they still haven't found someone to replace me. So
Wow.
There couldn't have been an easy decision on their part either.
Yeah. So, let's figure this out, because I'm trying to figure out, like, is it kind of just like the United States where the school culture from building to building is different? So maybe in one school, they really emphasize being respectful and, like being honoring to teachers, but maybe in another school, it's not an emphasis. So kids kind of do whatever they want. Or what do you think the differences were between the different experiences you've had?
Well, and of course, I'm preventing name and shame here. I'm not going to dox even though it's people that will see this and know who I am. It's pretty easy to figure out what schools I'm talking about. But this particular school had two buildings. One was for the younger kids, and then there's the senior building for the older kids, and it was kind of reflected in the staff as well. Like, the staff in the younger building was younger, and the staff in the senior building was older. And I was kind of in between those two worlds. I was teaching in both, and these two entities, if you will, even though they were the same school, weren't getting along very well. Pedagogical and didactical differences between the two. And remember, these are like the younger kids. They would go from the young building to the older building, but they're almost like two different schools. So this is where a lot of the friction emerged from, essentially. In the senior building, a lot of the teachers that I've seen there, older, more of a traditional approach to, how to, maintain your position of authority. So we're talking about, just go through the homework check, clear warnings. If they, if you say that you're going to send them out, say in advance, if you're not prepared for tomorrow, I don't want you in here. But also working with more traditional tools, so pen and paper, essentially. Whereas in the younger building, it was a little looser. And I think the biggest poor decision, if I may say so, that they made there was that all the kids had tablets to work on. Now, I don't know how much serious work you've ever done on a tablet, but I think it's the worst device to do any serious work. It's basically for apps and fun stuff. You can, pop on Netflix there and just, or whatever. But actually serious schoolwork on just a big touchscreen, no, I think that's cognitively damaging, essentially. But that's just, that's what they were about. We're the new type of education. So everyone gets a tablet. We do a lot of the work on the tablets, a lot of the tests on the tablets. And just I remember one teacher there was like, he told me something he did. He put a topic for debate. And I think his statement was, teenagers can teach just as well as a trained teacher, or something to that. And he was like surprised that people disagreed with that. Because he was like, well, I can't believe they disagree. I mean, I learn from them so much every day. And like, no, this just shows that they want a figure of authority. Like, that's what kids seek, essentially, someone who can show them, that are experts in something, that are an authority. I just thought that was a very naive reaction to that. Like, oh, kids can do it just as well as it. Like, no. So they go from that environment to a more traditional environment. And then by that time, they're 15, 16. They're used to the looser environment that I just described. And yeah, of course, that's not going to integrate very well. So that's one same school that I'm just describing. So yeah, absolutely. It really has to start from square one, because if you want to do all this reverse engineering, it's just it's really difficult. And I was kind of thrown into that as a starting teacher. I don't know if that answer's too elaborate.
Oh, no. So
just cut out
did you
whatever
teach
you want
the
to get.
younger ones? Were you teaching the younger ones then?
Both.
Both. Oh, okay.
So I had colleagues in both buildings, and the terror class was from the younger building that I just described, the one that eventually won in the sense that they got me relieved from my duties. Well, it wasn't just them, but they delivered the final blow.
Wow.
Essentially.
That's hard.
Well, you learn. I mean, I don't think it would happen to me again. It was just too much for me at that moment. I wasn't able to bring in anything that I had to reinvent myself. Still kind of in the process of forming my teacher self, if you will. So the old building had a very good system in place where it had a special department for, like, if you sent a kid out, they had to go there and they would take care of, when is this kid gonna, because they get sent out, when are they gonna resit the hour? You don't have to worry about it from that point on. I'd send out a kid in the terror class, so to speak, and I finished the class and I went to find him at the this little room where he has to go. And I found out later that they just talked to him and they kind of ripped up the send out without my consent, completely undermining my my position as an authority. So yeah, there was a lot of was, for a starting teacher, just too much to navigate there, I suppose.
Wow. So how does it work? Because it sounds like you can have a part-time teaching job or a full-time teaching job in the Netherlands. Is that kind of how it works?
It's almost becoming the standard now, which is also a problem all in itself. Because the contracts that I had so far were essentially replacement or temporary replacement contracts. So the way we do it is it's called FTE. So let's say a 1 FTE contract that's a full-time job. It's going to be 20 plus teaching hours, usually times 2. So that's a full week of work. So the contract I had that I was relieved from eventually was a 0.8 contract. So that's like 20% less than a full contract. And then you have 0.6, and you can even have contracts that are like 0.2, whereas that's probably 2 days in a week for all your teaching hours. Yeah, it's increasingly becoming very flexible to take smaller contracts and even work at multiple schools at the same time. I mean, I would not advise anyone to do that, but a lot of the teachers that are colleagues of mine, they have smaller contracts, like around 0.6 usually, which is what I would advise for starting teachers to not exceed the 0.6. And then, of course, there's always extra tasks for you if you're the head of a department or what we call mentor, where you're basically it's almost like a counseling position. In addition to all your teaching, so that can add up to your hours as well. But yeah, no single colleague of mine has the same contract, so it's pretty flexible. I know that's
really different than here. Yeah, here, like, you might, like, one of my years, I would go into work at 7 in the morning and leave at 4 p.m. 5 days a week. So we don't really have options to have a small schedule.
Yeah, well, I mean, in theory, I mean, for me, yeah, usually I'm also the one to leave when the cleaning crew shows up, despite my hours. Yeah, we have a lot of, and it's also because we are a profession that's highly in demand. So, employers will be more flexible. Yeah, the position is very good now. They'll agree if you don't want to do the Fridays because they really need people. Yeah.
Wow.
So in that sense, yeah, there's a bit of a teacher crisis here as well. People leaving the profession.
Wow. So I'm curious, like, what misbehavior looks like in the Netherlands. Like, would they ever curse at you, or would they more just like kind of ignore what you were telling them to do?
There's that. I've did had the under the breath cursing. But I don't know. It's the thing that I really just get so tired of, and I don't know why this is. Because it's not cold in our schools. There's something about not taking their coats off every lesson. Those coats are still on. And you can make a joke about that like 2 times, but then it just gets annoying. I have to mention that every time. And then most of the times they'll just take it off if you say something about it, but sometimes they do it very slowly. Sometimes accompany it with chewing gum in the mouth as well, or they'll start some epistemological discussion whether it actually is a coat or belongs to some other category of clothing. So you do have that where they will try to, for whatever reason, be a little less careful with the policies that are in place. And then there's just students that, I had one kid who was a bit on the spectrum, and he would just, I don't know, in the middle of some exercise, he'd be on the floor doing push-ups. And I did have to, I hope I handled that well. You should never lose your temper ever. You can be firm, but it should always be controlled. It's never an excuse to misbehave. So I've seen that, but I try to be careful not to react too aggressively or whatever, because you never know what the underlying situation is with a kid. And how much they can really help what they're doing. And I know, and I think you actually showed, I don't think you actually showed the video of the teacher being attacked in one of your recent videos. Mm-hmm. I've only heard about instances like that. And I have one colleague who's actually an ex-military guy, which you wouldn't really, by looking at him, you wouldn't have guessed, but he's like really into martial arts. But he had a student actually threaten him in the front of his own home. Student just shows up in front of his house, saying, "I'm going to kill you."
Wow.
And so this is what he told me. He took off his watch and he's like, "Well, you've got 3 seconds," which de-escalated that situation. It's not something I could do convincingly. But that was a little scary story. But that's like outlier behavior. We don't have problems with that. There's certain areas, of course, but I haven't seen any of that type of like out of control violence towards teachers, thankfully. Covered.
Yeah. So what about like work habits? Is it common for you to assign something in class, maybe like 30 minutes of work, and will students sit there and focus on it, or do they kind of complain and kind of not want to get their work done?
There's that complaining, and sometimes you just have to incite them to get them excited about a certain assignment. I think a recent example that I can give is this is like the first year Cambridge class that I'm temporarily taking over right now. So these are very young kids, and I wanted them to do a creative writing assignment by hand. So the minute it popped up on the screen, they already started, "No!" like in unison, just by seeing that they had to do a writing. So like, hang on, guys. I haven't even gotten to the instruction yet. But I told them, okay, I do this assignment every now and then with kids of types of classes like these Cambridge classes. I'd already done it during my internship. I've actually, what I did was I'd taken one of the stories that a kid had written that I thought was particularly interesting to use. And I turned it into a video with narration, animated video. So I showed them that first. Now that video was like a huge hit with like the more like the younger boys, especially because I think it was written by younger boys. So they thought it was great and wanted me to play it again. And then they all started writing like crazy, and they all came up to me like, "Oh, listen!" They all wanted me to hear their stories. They were lining up. And of course, there's still kids that rolled their eyes and didn't really want to do it. But yeah, I tried to incite them to get them excited about creative writing exercise like that in those ways. But, sometimes you just have to lay down the law and just say like, well, I expect this many words. And, we have 15 minutes for this, so you better have something by the end of the 15 minutes. And if if you're stuck or whatever, you can, ask me for help. But we're doing this now. yeah, there's, trying to get them excited in the way that I described, but also showing, that you're serious about it. Because I hate the question, is this for a grade? Because that essentially translates to, oh, it's not, so it's going to be completely low effort garbage. So I always leave that question open. I'm like, I don't want to answer that question because it's not relevant. I just tell them it's not a relevant question.
So how do grades work? Here we kind of, depending on the zone, we might have like an A through F system. Does that exist where you are, or how do grades work?
We have 1 to 10, so 10 is excellent.
Okay.
And then there's 1, and we're not allowed to give zeros.
Mhm.
And if you have a very straightforward rubrics or whatever, grading can be pretty easy. I do find it more difficult if it's something like speaking or presentation, where I don't know, someone can put a lot of effort in their subject and present it very well, but it's kind of riddled with grammar mistakes or whatever. I still want to give them a passing grade, but then someone else comes up clearly unprepared because they think they know English. So, and they do actually speak English very well, but I can tell that they threw it together in a couple of minutes. It's like, well, what am I going to do here? Because they're very sensitive to fairness, I suppose. And it's hard to avoid those discussions where they'll come up after you, like, you gave that presentation higher than mine. Why? And you get all of that. In that sense, it's because you're teaching a language. It's always like, okay, am I gonna be very strict about the grammar and the pronunciation? Or is it more seeing that they've put effort into something that they've done, that they've they've actually taken the time to delve into a subject and made a well-structured presentation, and then so people can still end up scoring an 8, which is pretty high, even though person A has a terrible pronunciation. The other person has almost like native sounding pronunciation, but they both have an 8. Those are the more difficult things to navigate in that sense. But then I love the multiple choice tests, of course, because it's either correct or it isn't.
So are grades public? Do they compete with each other, or how does that work?
They are very public, yeah. Because as soon as you put them in the system, they get a message. They can see it. They're all talking about each other's grades. As soon as a grade comes in, they'll announce it and then compare, and then that can cause discussions. It is a great tool to actually, because I had one kid who still had to do, I know he was behind on like 3 things. So I sent a message to him and his parents. Didn't hear anything. So I just put in a 1. And he was in front of my classroom within minutes. Magically reappeared. I hadn't seen him for weeks. So they're pretty, I mean, they're not necessarily public, but people are very verbal about them. They don't make a secret of it. And of course, they're sometimes accidentally on your on your screen. But I try to not, like, I never do like a public thing where I list everyone's grades one by one and everyone can hear it. I try to be as discreet with them as possible.
So what happens if people don't turn in work? Is it possible for them to have to repeat that class or grade, or do you just like talk to the parents? How does that work?
Unfortunately, I feel that sometimes they can do something, they can resit something 4 times or more, which kind of creates this apathetic, like disinterested attitude with some students, where they'll go into a test with the idea of, I'll do this one later, so I'm just gonna fail it now. It's part of my plan. They've planned out what they're gonna resit. So like, okay, I don't have to do this now. I can do this later. I can always try again. Okay, I'm gonna kind of try this test because I still have 3 extra lives on this one. So yeah, they can redo things to a fault, I would say. It's something has to change in that regard pretty quickly, because we can see a huge amount of just I don't know, just no motivation in some students to do anything. I don't know what it is. It's like there's no spark or intellectual curiosity in some of the students these days. I don't know if you recognize any of this.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
shocked to hear you say that because I wasn't sure if it was just like an American culture problem, but I have had teachers from all over the world say the same thing. So I wonder if it has to do with popular culture and social media and technology. That's kind of my only guess.
Yeah, because you wouldn't think, like, inherently they're still the same kids, and we put so much emphasis on like digital literacy now, and it's good to try and incorporate technology because it's going to be part of our daily lives. But I see at the same time that well, ChatGPT, for instance, is something that I had to introduce to some of the students. Some of them don't even know what it is. And I'm like, but you're on your computer all the time. How do you not know? I mean, there's always like, there's of course a select few that are on top of those things, and because I think the school that I work now actually has ChatGPT blocked. But one kid was like, "Well, I get a VPN and I can circumstance. He can still get around it." Like so, but that's like a kid that's like very tech savvy. But you would expect this generation to be more tech savvy, and I'm not always that impressed by their tech skills because sometimes I'll ask them because they're like, "Sir, how do I hand in this document?" And I'll ask them, "Well, where did you save it?" And like, "What do you mean?" Like, "Well, where did you save the document?" It's just like, "Well, on the computer." But yes, where? Like, there's folders, like stuff like that. Just blows my mind because they're just, but then it makes sense if you're only using apps like TikTok or everything that's just kind of like has this layout for you where you just press a button and something happens. And it's not that surprising that they're not aware of something like ChatGPT and what it can do. As you know, it's actually, I mean, my school has blocked it, but I think that doesn't really, that's not the long-term solution for it, because we're gonna have to just find a way to embrace ChatGPT. Actually, yeah.
What are the parents like?
Luckily well, that sounds I've had minimal experience with parents. The ones that I have talked to were very nice and very much understanding on the side of the teacher. And I also do a lot of like tutoring, kind of as freelance. So I deal with the parents mostly through that. So the parents that I've seen so far, they're very much, I haven't met any teacher that's where you can kind of sense there's this anti-school, anti-educational system sentiment. Although that actually might be a little different for the other school that I'm also working on that we didn't get to yet. But the parents so far have been pretty nice and understanding. They trust what I tell them. They don't have any because I don't know if you've ever dealt with parents who seem to always assume the most negative thing about, like, oh, yeah, you have.
Oh,
so
yeah.
That's been spared for me so far.
Well, that's good. So, is teaching what you thought it would be, and are you enjoying it as much as you thought you would? What are your overall feelings now that you've been teaching and had some different experiences just about the teaching field in general?
Yeah. Because you always, you go in thinking it's going to be like Dead Poet Society, where they'll be just saluting you on the desks as you leave. Well, that's not quite the reality of it, unless your name's, Robin Williams, maybe. It's very, you definitely can't expect to go in there and be great at it right away. But I do feel in my case, it's hopeful that I haven't forsaken it just yet. Because when you do get those moments that are, where you see appreciation from a student, they're excited about some assignment that you've given them, or they've been able to show something of themselves through an assignment, or just, thanking you because they finally passed this test. The reward of that is so great that I can take all the negative stuff. It just doesn't weigh out. So yeah, I would say you can't expect every day to be equally rewarding. But if you keep a clear eye on why you're there and why you're doing it, and not try too hard to meet up to administration expectations or whoever's breathing down your neck that day, and keep the relationship with the students as that's the thing you want to maintain. That's where you want to score. It's definitely going to be one of the greatest jobs that you could have, because then you can just go in there and do something that you know a lot about. You can help people. You can be a figure of authority. Yeah, you still have a boss, but you're the boss in that particular classroom. Well, there's paid vacations. I mean, hello. Those are little things that are definitely worth keeping things in perspective. And you can't have a thin skin in this profession. Absolutely not. Just the amount of I mean, the eyes are on you for, I don't know, sometimes 6 hours a day. And it's incredibly draining sometimes, energy-wise. But you can get a lot of that back. It's an investment. So far so good. I'm still learning a lot, but I certainly haven't given up just yet. So,
what are the observations like? Because at least in America, there's been a push to have administrators in the classroom constantly popping in unannounced all the time and then giving evaluations. So is it like that in the Netherlands too?
Yes. And then they'll pop in for 15 minutes and then judge the 60-minute lesson based on whatever they happen to observe in that moment. They pop their heads in the door. Yeah, there's always the meetings where someone's presenting all these statistics just seem meaningless to everyone else in the room. And that's we gotta do more. I don't know, whatever theorist is hot to throw out. Do more Rosenshine principles, and go. Well, did you start the lesson by? And then it's always the most obvious thing that you kind of do anyway. But then they want you to do it at a certain moment in the class in a way that they envision. So there's definitely a lot of that, but it's I do. I mean, we of course have to keep them happy as well, but I do notice that along colleagues, there's not a lot of weight attached to a lot of that stuff. Teachers are always. I mean, of course, we're critical, and there's always room for improvement. But no, we don't take it that super seriously either. Yeah, we value each other's input more and each other's feedback, and we do a lot of peer feedback when we sit in each other's lessons and learn and give feedback and just talk about how should we approach this and that. We as teachers respect each other, and we know what we're talking about. So that's usually the type of feedback that we really put a lot of weight on.
Do you guys have lesson plans? Because at least, there's been, depending on the district, there might be a huge push to do 8-page lesson plans per day. And then there's been buildings where they don't care about the lesson plans at all. So how does that work for you guys?
Well, if someone's going to be sitting in that day, then yeah, there's always a very detailed lesson plan. Of course, I mean, for my training, I had to make a lot of them, and they're good to have if you're starting out. For you, mostly to know where you are in a certain lesson, and what are the students supposed to do at this moment. Do I want them to ask questions at this point or not? When am I ready to give the instructions? Make sure, check that the instructions have been understood. So yeah, lesson plans are incredibly helpful tools, especially if you're just starting out. You have to make them as strenuous, and because we're always trying to do less work. It's just human nature. But these lesson plans it can even just be a generic template that you make for yourself, and you kind of in broad strokes hold on to that, because at the end of the day, the students want to know what to expect from you. When you start, what are we going to do today? All of that. How much time do we have for this assignment? And if you haven't thought of that beforehand, you're going to come across you're going to notice the classes also will start to drift away and other things will be happening. So they're not it's not something that you have to show your supervisor or whatever every day, but I still use a lot of my my previously made lesson plans. I always change things around because there's always room for improvement. But of course, I also know colleagues that don't really use them. They might have such a clear conception in their minds of what they're doing that they've reached a point where they don't need it. But I don't make them from the ground up as much because I simply don't have time for that. But I definitely use them. Yeah. But always leave room for improvisation. Don't stick, because that's not going to work either. You also need to develop this sense of being able to go with the flow a bit, and be aware of even just simple things like, okay, is this going to be like a 9th hour at the end of the day? Maybe not do this particular assignment. Let's move that early in the morning on another day. This might take longer than I've planned out. Things like that. Yeah, you have to use those for your own clarity, I suppose. Yeah.
So kind of in recent times, at least when I started teaching kind of back in 2013, they were trying to make the transition away from teacher-centered, instruction to more like student-centered instruction, where there was lots of group assignments and collaboration and having the kids explore. So I'm curious, in the Netherlands, is it more traditional where the teacher, is giving a lecture for 15 or 20 minutes and then the students work silently, or are they moving toward the more communal, collaborative, student-based model of teaching?
That is becoming increasingly more popular. I've definitely, I still do it's not like a lecture. What I usually try to incorporate is just brief moments of interaction. So it's not just me, I pose a question. I let them think about something. I ask someone to, something from the group. So it's not just uninterrupted lecturing. I think most of my colleagues do things like that. Collaboration, it's more, it depends from subject to subject. I think particularly STEM subjects, math, for instance, those tend to be, from what I've seen, more traditional instruction, individual work, check, repetition, not so much collaborative. But subjects that lend themselves for more collaborative ways of working, yeah, I see it more and more. And, there's something to be said for that, because at the end of the day, people become motivated when they feel like they're doing something meaningful. And I think most meaning is created from a group, from interaction. We're trying to achieve a certain goal. Who's going to take what role, inspire each other, get ideas from each other, learn from each other. Of course, always overseen by the authority of the teacher. I would be very careful in having that become the main way of education. So just the collaborative way of approaching things, because direct instruction, individual practice, time and time again, that does, from all the meta-analysis and cohort studies that are done on this, it does show that that's just highly effective. So I do hope that continues to exist, but we do have to cater to the more limited attention span of Gen Z. And what's the other, the alpha's coming up now, right?
Yeah.
Whose attention span, I believe, is even shorter.
Oh yeah.
Where those long traditional lecture styles, they're just not going to work. At the same token, we're preparing them, depends on the level that we're teaching, we are preparing them for universities where they will have to sit through 2-hour lectures still. So I'm a little torn, because we also cannot endlessly cater to their shorter and shorter attention span. Something needs to happen there too, I feel. And I don't know if you've heard of this UK school, the Michaela Community School. Have you ever heard of?
No, I was going to ask you about also the Sudbury Valley School, so you can tell me about both of those.
Yeah, so the Michaela Community School, I think it's founded by someone, I don't want to get her name wrong, Catherine Birbal Singh. It's kind of an exotic name. The Michaela Community School, it's in Wembley. It's been called the strictest school in the UK. So you'll go there and the students will be in single file in the hallways quietly. They all pass out the lunch trays. sit down and just imagine the most streamlined, strict environment that you can imagine. Now, people can say, well, this goes too far or whatever. But when I was hearing about the school, I mean, regardless of what you may think, say what you want, but it does sound like a fantastic environment for a teacher to work, because everything is in order. Everything is structured. They'll stand up when they see a teacher. They're used to the old school lecturing, sitting in rows, listening to the teacher. I saw footage of the school where an entire class is raising their hand. I've never seen that myself, unless I ask who wants to go home, of course. But other than that, I've never seen a whole class raise their hand to answer a question. I mean, that's, you can call that an extreme or whatever, but I don't know. I mean, a little more of that, I think that would get us back in a more desirable direction when it comes to education, and that has nothing to do with conservative or progressive or whatever. An educational system needs structure in order to operate. So that's one extreme, if you will. That's the Michaela Community School. Definitely have a look at it when you can. So I haven't been there. I would love to visit. But yeah, so in addition to my quote unquote regular school, I also work at a school that's just starting up, local school, and it's based on the Sudbury Valley model. So what's the idea there? There's no structure. There's no schedules. There are no authority figures. The teacher is just a guide on the side. There's no curriculum. It's just a building that has computers and books and some adults walking around there. Now, originally, this school wanted me to do it for free. I know I had to kind of pass on that. So we agreed to some payment. Of course, this school is not subsidized. The parents have to pay quite a lot of money monthly to have their kid go there. So I can only be there one day a week, because otherwise they'll be out of business because they can't pay me. But I was curious to see, what that was like. And what I do enjoy about it is that it's very small scale. It's very relaxed, obviously. I'm never in a rush to get to the next class on time because there's no schedule. What I do is I just go in and I have individual appointments with students. They want to work on listening skills, reading skills, whatever. From 12 to 1 with me. I'll make sure that I'm there. We'll find a place to sit. And yeah, it's just one-on-one. It's really relaxed. I can give my full attention to one student. I can completely focus on their needs, them as an individual. Whatever they want to develop specifically, I can completely cater to. But that is if they want to follow English class. There's also kids that haven't showed interest. And I see, there's not that many kids there, but some of them, like one kid, for instance, all I've ever seen him do ever is, this is from, let's say 9 to 4, is play Roblox on a computer. It's kind of like a Lego type game. So 6 hours of Roblox uninterrupted. That's one school day. I don't know what he does the rest of the week. That's what I've seen. I'm not sure if I would pay that much money as a parent for him to do that, but I can't force him to do anything. That's what he chooses to do. I've seen kids, like I'm trying to, focus with this one student who is serious, and he's also a little older and has a clear goal of what he wants. We're sitting in like this living room area, and then other kids will come in with a keyboard from the music room that they somehow ended up breaking. They'll just start opening it up, taking out the print plates, just kind of make a wobbly sound, put it back together. Now the thing's even more broken, and I'm kind of like wondering what they're doing exactly. It doesn't seem very productive. So this comes back to my point of authority, because there's no authority in that particular environment. Every now and then there's a meeting where one of the people there is going to try to, like the cleaning, for instance, needs to be done by volunteers as well, but nobody ever wants to do it. And I mean, if you're going to have that be done on a voluntary basis, I don't know. 9 out of 10 times nobody has any inkling to do anything. So as much as I enjoy the one-on-one with the individual students, the complete lack of an authority figure in that type of environment, I don't see it working, especially if your ambitions are to make it not, because now it's like there's about 7 students there in the higher level. So okay, that's manageable. But if you want to, I don't know, expand, which is their goal, and there does seem to be a demand for this type of alternative education, if you will. I feel like the lack of authorities, it's ultimately going to collapse into itself. So
they're never together. It's always just one kid with an adult in the room, or
sometimes it's just a group of kids who, I mean, most of the times I just see them doing stuff on their tablets. Sometimes they're in the music room. I've done sessions with like a group of them, which they enjoyed, but then I gave them homework and then I didn't hear from them again. Now the only sanction that you can really give there is that you simply stop teaching them. So I did. I'm not teaching you anymore unless you start responding to my emails, or take some, because there's this heavy focus on the natural proclivity for learning, exploring, and all of that, but there's a complete disregard for an authority figure that actually shows you what you need to do to accomplish certain goals. The kids don't always know what is required. They want someone that tells them, that basically just tells them what to do. They appreciate that. So it's an interesting experience. I'm curious to see how it goes, because I really enjoy, once again, the motivated students that are there, that are always willing to take on a new assignment, that have a clear goal and a vision. But a lot of kids don't have clear goals yet. They need someone to point them in some direction, and they're not always just going to come up to you out of their own free will. There needs to be structure. So
interesting. Wow. I definitely like the sound of the Michaela school better than this other one.
These are the two extremes.
Yeah.
And I see the good in both. Yeah, the Michaela sounds, I think, just to work there as a teacher, as a dream gig. And I hear that they have so much time to actually prepare their lessons, and all these things that can get so easily cluttered up. Yeah, Michaela, definitely look it up when you have the time. I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to interview with her too, and to hear her rationale, because I feel like I probably agree with her like 100% on everything. So.
I don't know about that, but yeah, I think she's known as the Dragon Lady. I think she has her own website. It's called the Strictest Headmistress.com, which is not something. Yeah, it's not. You don't need incognito mode to go to that one. It's
funny. Well, this has been really interesting. I've kind of wanted to get a feel for, how different it might be teaching in the Netherlands. And what I gather is the behaviors probably are not as extreme as some of the ones in the US, but it's still hard, just because teaching's hard no matter where you're at, because, engaging students and motivating them to work and to learn, especially in the social media and technology age, it's just kind of like an uphill battle. And so this has been really interesting, like really, really interesting. Is there anything else that you would like for, American or other people around the world to know about you or the Netherlands, or just anything interesting?
About the Netherlands?
Or just anything.
We'll definitely come down here to Amsterdam and try our stroopwafels. STROOP waffles. Just the best that you can possibly find. When did you start teaching, roughly?
I started teaching in 2013. Basically, I went through what is called an alternative certification program. And so I had a bachelor's degree, and basically I learned how to be a teacher while teaching. And so it was really weird. It was a 2-year program. And so we would be taking our graduate degree classes in the evenings and weekends while learning how
Oh,
to
wow.
teach like hands-on in the classroom. And it was super crazy. It was called
Yeah.
Teach for America. So.
Teacher. Oh, right, right. Yeah, I'm familiar with that
Mhm.
program. So for you, like, how did you kind of form to your teacher persona? Was that kind of a journey as well, or did you make any
Oh,
conscious choices along the way?
yeah. Oh, goodness. Well, the first 2 years that I taught fourth grade. And honestly, the classroom management was not too terrible. Of course,
Mm.
I thought it was being a new teacher, but I didn't discover terrible until my third year of teaching, where I taught seventh and eighth graders. And oh my goodness, it sounds probably like something like what you experienced. Like it was awful. Like the
You lucked out
kids
of the
just like,
class as well. Oh.
yeah, the kids just like fought me and they didn't respect me
God.
at all and they didn't want to listen to
Oh,
me and it was just terrible. And so I think I made a lot of the classic mistakes of trying to be cool. And I'm like
yeah.
naturally a really nice person and like really
Mm.
empathetic and sensitive and kind. And so I think being like a younger teacher with like teenagers, I think on the one hand, they need that authority, but at least, what I've experienced is like they also don't like it. So it's this weird relationship of them constantly like testing the boundaries and pushing. And I would kind of feel like it was a no-win situation. Like I felt like if I was too strict and too strong, then they would tell their parents like, oh, she's so mean. But then I felt like if I was myself, which is kind of nice and playful, I felt like they didn't respect me and they just wanted to keep like joking or like kind of treat me like a peer and not like a leader. And so that was just like a disaster. So after that, then I went to teaching sixth graders. And that was like easier because they weren't as intimidating because, they were a bit younger. And I was like, after going through that nightmare, I was just like, oh, I
Mm.
can deal with these sixth graders any day. But it was weird. I don't know. Like, I think after a while, I kind of figured out like the blend of like how authoritative to be while also letting my personality shine through. But at the end of the day, I don't know. I feel like kids today are like so rebellious. I would
Mm.
just feel like they just did not want to do what they were supposed to do. Like even the simplest things, like how you mentioned the how like kids would want to take off, their like jackets or whatever for a dress
Yeah.
code. It would just be like things like that. Like we're not supposed to have like hoodies on over, our heads or whatever. So I'd have to tell students all the time, like, take your hood off, take your hood off. And just like, we'd have like little places to line up and they never wanted to line up where they were supposed to. They wouldn't do their homework, we too like had a ton of immersion with technology. So, when they were supposed to be doing their work, they were video chatting each other or drawing or typing in Google Docs back and forth. And it was just like a nonstop uphill battle of kids not doing what they were supposed to. And it wasn't even so much that they were super aggressive towards me, although I did get a lot of the teenage eye rolling and mumbling
Yeah.
under the breath. It was
Yeah.
just like trying so hard to get them to do what they were supposed to do. And they just didn't want to. And it was just so exhausting because I
Mm.
felt like there was nowhere I could go with it. Like I could say, something simple like sit up and they'd like slouch all over the place and be leaning all around. And it was just exhausting. And so I just feel like at a bare minimum, there has to be like a 50-50 relationship with teacher to student. I feel like the teachers have to show up. They need to have their lessons prepared. They need to do what
Yeah.
they can do to be engaging, but then the students have to come ready to learn, ready to follow basic directions. And I just felt like that was not non-existent. I felt like they almost had the attitude of like, entertain me. I dare you to. I dare you to be interesting enough to capture my attention. And I don't know. I felt like I was more like a cruise director than like a teacher because I mean
Oh.
it felt like I had to have just like this massive energy and just like steal their attention and constantly be changing things up. And I'm like, if I wanted to be a Broadway performer, that's what I would have done. Like I want to teach, not perform. But it just felt like that was the only option. And it felt like that's what administration wanted to see too. And like, I just
Yeah.
felt like when push came to shove and the kids needed to sit down and work hard, I just felt like they would not do it. So that's a long way of saying, like, if I were to go back now and be like a substitute teacher or something, I feel
Right.
like I could command enough authority to get the kids to listen. And I feel like I'm nice enough and funny enough where they would perceive me to be nice, but that perfect balance of like nice and authoritative and motivational and inspirational, I feel like I know very few people that are able to do this miracle that we're supposed to be able to
Yeah.
do, as long as kids just come in with the attitude of like, I'm just going to sit here. I dare you to make me learn. So that was a long answer, but that's kind of was my journey.
So how did you finally like get to the place where you're like, okay, now, I'm the Trisha that gets things done the way I want to? Like, did you have to become more authoritative, or did it feel like you had to sacrifice some part of your personality maybe? Or how
Yeah,
did you
that's a good
develop?
question. I felt like I was constantly trying to figure out how to motivate them. So shamelessly, I just bought loads of candy and I would be like, all right, whoever can answer this question, I'll give you candy. And I would use like lots of shiny technology. So there was like Vocabulary. There's a website called Vocabulary
Yeah.
that had like educational rap. There was Brain Pop that had like
Yeah.
educational cartoon videos. And so I would put like quizzes on the screen and I'd be like,
Yes.
if we can get 100 on this quiz as a class, you all get candy. And so it was just like me trying really hard to like tap into any kind of like friendly competition that they would have. I would do a lot of like partnership and teamwork, and it was just everything I could do to try to get them interested and to try to make them feel like they were succeeding. So I would make like a big deal of like them learning things and just, really affirm them a lot and encourage them a lot. I would do things like, put a giant timer on the screen with music and say, okay, we're going to work on our paper for, the next 20 minutes. And I would just be like up on my feet a lot, like circulating and walking around. So it just felt like just massive energy, I had to put in, and by the time the day was over, I would just literally come home and sleep for like 3 hours. Whereas I
Yeah.
think in another time, it's just like teachers didn't have to do all that. Like kids they came and they were like,
Yeah.
okay, I have to work. They understood that not everything's super entertaining and flashy. Like sometimes
Mhm.
learning is hard. At least that's how it is in college. Professors weren't doing backflips trying to get us to learn content. Like we came with a mindset like, okay, I'm going to have to work. And so I just think with like a lot of educational trends, it's just all about like the quick flash, the dopamine burst, just everything else. Like in culture, it's just like a really quick, short-sighted way of doing things. But I think a lot is sacrificed in the long term. And so, I do think it depended on the group. With some groups, I felt like I could not be as smiley and nice because I felt like they would perceive that as weakness and like
Yeah.
attack. And that's hard for me, because it's just, I feel like it takes as much energy for me to be like super like stern faced as it does for me to be like, woo, learn. Both are like a ton of energy. But I felt like the minute I would just like dial down and just be normal, I felt like I was losing them. So it was almost like I had to pick one extreme. Either I'm like, sideshow teacher doing all kinds of entertainment, or I'm like, no smiling, let's get down to business. It's time to work teacher. And neither one was, I think, like optimal for like long-term
Yeah.
education. And I think that's too like what eventually got me to the point of burnout. And
Yeah.
I think too, like sometimes a few kids can change the dynamic of a whole room,
Oh, yeah.
especially with like middle school age kids, like 13, 14. And so I would have that happen a lot where I'd be like, okay, I'm in a place where I want to be with the students, we're doing good. And then for some mysterious reason, two girls would decide they didn't like me. And then it would feel like they would turn half the class against me. And so then it felt like I was back in, middle school trying to be again, like, oh, like, please like me. Like, am I cool enough? Like, please, what do I do? And it's just too much for any human to do. I was like,
Yeah,
it's just
absolutely.
too much. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, no, I mean that's a classic instinct. You want them to like you. But how did you finally like navigate? Because I've also tried the flashy, spinning plates, whatever. It's just too exhausting. And it burns out pretty quickly too. It's really about finding how to dose those moments so that they'll actually be moments that kind of break the usual way of doing things. I too have tried the super strict thing. I have noticed that sometimes I enjoyed it too much, maybe, where I don't know. I think this is a pretty recent example. Some kid had left his notebook on the floor, and the floor was cluttered with pieces of paper, which obviously came from that notebook. So he made a mess of the classroom. So the next lesson, I asked, "Whose notebook is this?" And the kid raised his hand, and he came up to retrieve it, I suppose. But he was kind of, and this really, it's really got under my skin. He was trying to take it from my hands. Like I hadn't even,
Oh, wow.
I wasn't even handing it yet. I was still saying something. So pretty tall, by the way. So I'm like, did you just try to grab it? So what I did, and there wasn't a lot in this notebook, so I'm not saying this was pedagogically correct thing to do. I ripped up the notebook. Like in the paper basket. But then I got the point across, I guess. But I also feel like once you're in that category of teacher, kids especially, they like consistency. So because adults, we understand that people can be more nuanced, but if you then want to go back to the fun Broadway performance that you just described, they will perceive that as bipolar almost, I guess.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't want to lock myself into being the super strict teacher all the time, even though that's for some classes necessary. But at the same time, they talk to each other a lot, so the inconsistency will arise. And again, the Dutch are very direct, so they'll be like, "Sir, why are you so strict with us, but not with them?" You get that whole thing. So I'm very much still in the process myself of finding my place in that between those two extremes, I suppose. But I dress. Well, I always have the orange turtleneck. Actually, it's almost like a conscious decision to be recognizable instantly. Orange turtleneck, it's Mr. Kramer. The apparel oft proclaims the man. Not to look too casual, so that I don't blend in too much.
Well, one thing I wonder if this would work is something that I've tried is being like super honest with kids. And since the Dutch are direct, I would try actually telling them and saying, like, I will be as nice as you will let me be. But if I find that you're not able to handle it, I'm going to be, mean, Mr. Kramer. And I would just kind of see how they did, because I would tell especially when I taught different classes, I would say, hey, unfortunately I had a really fun activity with second hour, but we can't do that in fourth hour because you guys lose your minds. I mean, I would think it'd be really interesting to see how they would handle that degree of honesty. And then maybe if they heard that there was a difference, I would say, hey, well, second hour could really handle fun Mr. Kramer, but you guys need Mr. Grinch Mr. Kramer. And so that'd be interesting to see how they would handle that degree of honesty.
And different turtlenecks to go with.
That'd be fun. It's interesting. I think kids are not sure what they want, honestly, because I just think that a part of them really does crave that authority, like you said. But at least I don't know how it is in in the Netherlands, but I feel like in America, parenting is very casual and very lax. So I would find that the kids were very much used to being, kind of like I'm going to say like the equivalent of their parents, but almost like what you described with the Sudbury Valley. It's just like, there is no adult at home. And so they would have mixed reactions, because I think kids inherently crave boundaries, but they also, maybe that little rebellious spark, they kind of want to push against it. And so I would try to have like honest conversations with, students about their behavior and their attitude. And sometimes if they were being naughty, I would just say, if I talk to my boss the way you just talked to me, would I have a job tomorrow? And that would kind of get them to reflect about like their actions and their behavior. So I do think too, like a certain degree, being super, super honest with kids helps. But I think it can be different depending on the culture, because I tried that my nightmare year of teaching 7th and 8th grade, and it made them disrespect me more. So I guess, kind of filling out like what kind of kids they are helps a lot too.
Talk to your mother that way. Yeah.
And some of them would be like, no, because my mom would smack me. It's like, well, can't do that.
No, no. Maybe at the
Do you guys have
that's yeah.
detentions in the Netherlands? That's where like they have to come after school and sit there
Yeah.
in silence for an hour. Does that exist in the Netherlands?
Well, no, they usually have to do work during detention.
Oh, okay.
They don't just sit there. If they're
So you
sent
do have
out,
it.
yeah, we do have detention, but it's usually like either you were sent out, so you have to come back after school and work on something. If you skipped a class or whatever, yeah. But it's not just you just sit there in silence watching the clock.
Yeah, or they
Oh,
can work
okay.
sometimes too. It could
Oh,
be
okay.
either. Yeah.
um, yeah, usually there's some detention system in place, which is good because I would hate having to come up with an individual punishment for every kid that I send out. That would just seem like more work. I would probably be more inclined not to send them out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, most
Oh,
of the
you know
schools
what?
that
I don't think.
yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
most of the schools that I've worked at had a detention system in place, and usually they have actually people employed that just run that, which is very good.
Oh, thanks. And do you guys have homework? Like, do students have to do work at home?
Yes, and usually there's like a policy. There's always we use a digital system called Magister, for instance, that also takes care of attendance, and I can send message to the students, or they can spam me with irrelevant meme images. And that also has the schedule in it, so you can see if a class is something happens in the class is taking up the schedule. You can instantly see it. The previous school that I worked at also used this system, and they had it as a rule, which I was kind of against actually, that if I did not put the homework in that system for that day, I wouldn't have to do it. So what I would always do is because I want them to pay attention and make notes, I would tell them the homework in class. I want them to write it down there themselves because they became so dependent on. They didn't even. Oh, they just look at home, whatever, and their vision would become so segmented from day to day that I felt like they kind of lost sight of the bigger picture. So we do have homework, and a way I prefer to do it is to tell it once or twice in class. They have to write it down. And then all that I will put in the system is homework that was given in class. So if they didn't pay attention, then it's their fault. Of course, the students that aren't there, I will message individually. But yes, we have homework, and I try to be very enforcing with it. So I don't give up huge assignments, but it's something that, and I always tell them in advance why, etc. Because they actually like to know the why of everything. It's usually something we're going to be continuing with in that class. So if they haven't prepared, there's a problem there. They can't continue. That's how I like to approach homework. So they're usually not huge assignments, but I'm very serious about expecting them to do it, not show up, not having done it without a good reason.
And what happens, like, so would you say like probably like almost 100% of your students turn in their homework then?
No. They'll test it out first. Let's see what happens. What's Mr. Kramer gonna do if I don't do it? And then you make an example out of few students, and then you'll see a surprising increase in the percentage of people handing in their homework pretty quickly. So there's a lot to be said about the whole concept of homework, because this could be a whole podcast in itself on, I do think because sometimes they have 9 hours in a day, that expecting them to then come home and do X amount of homework is a little unreasonable, actually. They've been at school all day, and then just how much energy what they reasonably have left to do anything at that point. They're kind of cognitively already drained. I don't know how long school days usually are over there, but I would say I'd be in favor of from 8 to 2 or 3 p.m. and then they still have an afternoon to be productive. I think that would be good. I don't know how long the school days are in the U.S. What would you say?
It kind of depends. I've had schools that were like 6 hours, and then I've worked at like a charter school, for example, where it was like 8 hours. So it kind of depends on the school. So anywhere between 6 and 8 hours, I think, generally. And we have, tend to have like lunch breaks, and then they have like special classes like, PE, which is like, physical education, art, music. So it just kind of depends on the school district. So.
How did you go about with homework? Like, what type of assignments did you give, and
Yeah, homework was like my biggest frustration because I
Yeah.
happened to, work in a population that tended to be anywhere from 1 to 3 years behind. So it was really my opinion that if they ever wanted to realistically catch up, they absolutely had to do homework. And, the kids wouldn't do it. And so I tried, being an English teacher, I tried having them, do reading logs and reading homework. I tried sending home like grammar exercises. And then whenever we switched over much more to like iPad work, the school district would get super expensive apps. And so I would say, okay, you need to log in and do your, homework on the app. And I could
Oh
literally
no.
see who logged in, and like no one would log in and do it. And
Disaster.
so I tried everything from fun homework to reading homework to like skills homework, and just like the kids wouldn't do it. But we have a really weird system right now where basically most grades don't matter. So it's not like they're going to
Yeah.
get in trouble. It's not like they're going to
Yeah.
fail. And, the parents aren't really enforcing the completion of homework and really pushing the kids at all. So it's just kind of like, I think it's like a lose-lose situation, at least the kind of schools that I've taught at. And it was better at the private school. That's when I taught the 7th and 8th grade, the nightmare year. Their parents were paying a lot more money. So at least, those kids would tend to do their homework. But I've just noticed like the quality of work going way down. Just kind of students wanting to turn in the absolute bare minimum and expecting, like great grades. So it was a mess.
This is probably the biggest problem for not just this generation, but the next as well. Just the lack of, responsibility, I suppose. There seems to be this expectation that, they do the bare minimum and they should get all the accolades that come with hard work. And that's a problem we're having here as well. So from what I'm hearing from some of your stories in terms of, the disciplinary problems seem to be more severe, perhaps. So here there's still a healthy sense of respect, I feel. But at the same time, it's a generation that appears to lack vision or motivation, or just the sense of sitting down and focusing on something, working on something, putting it away, coming back to it later, see it develop. Just everything needs to be done and up to the next thing. So that's a huge problem, because you and I as well, I think we're very much used to, there was a clear expectation from us, and if you did the work, it paid. And we might be also just personally more interested in achieving certain goals or wanting to do certain things. Perhaps there's a deeper problem there with this generation that's kind of not that doesn't really know what they want to do in life, I guess. Because all their role models are sometimes horrible figures. Like, I know that if I mention Andrew Tate, everyone knows who he is, but this guy should not have any recognition whatsoever. It did get some people to play chess, though. So. I saw some kids playing chess. I'm like, young kids. I'm like, how do you play chess? Well, Andrew Tate. Okay.
Interesting.
That's why you picked up chess. Well, so I don't know. That's because in addition to the digital literacy problem that I mentioned, but I don't really know how to use computers or know what an algorithm is, or I mean, this should be basic knowledge for this generation. There's kids who cannot. They'll just look at you. Cultural literacy also seems to be disappearing, and that is to say that we're very much, when we grew up, kind of a frame of reference of, and this could be like biblical stories or historical events, figures that everyone would know, right? That kind of gave a sense of unity and like just a framework that we all shared. We could still be individuals within that, just certain references that everyone would understand. I feel like that's kind of breaking up more and more, and everything's more fragmented into individual social bubbles that don't always necessarily like overlap or understand each other.
Absolutely. I'm actually reading a book called, I'm reading a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. And I wonder if it kind of applies globally, because it's talking about how there's all these factions that they're so radicalized and they don't give each other the benefit of the doubt and they don't listen to each other with good faith. They just attack each other, and it's really out of control in America. I wonder if there's a bit more cultural unity maybe in the Netherlands, where people are not like at each other's throats so much. I'm like, the culture has to be better in the Netherlands than it is in the USA.
Unfortunately, politically, culturally, a lot of the stuff from America seems to be getting imported here, actually. So a huge distrust of the mainstream media, serious polarization between the left and the right, which, I had a sense for the longest time that we were kind of immune to that or something, as the Dutch, being a little more down to earth or whatever. But no, I'm unfortunately seeing a lot of those trends being imported into the Dutch culture as well.
Wow.
In a Dutch way. We're a much smaller country. There's still a huge sense of unison because we're so small. But no, some of the things that you've mentioned, it's definitely starting to show up here in the Dutch version.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Social media probably has a lot to do with it, I think.
Absolutely. Because it's these extreme views. There's also, if you're a politician, for instance, that seeks a certain position of power, you can just take the model that works. If I say these things, I'll get these people aligned with me, and if I can kind of do it in a charismatic way, I'll get a political following, for instance. And because the social media is structured in such a way that whatever you like, you'll get more of that. It's, if you want it and you have a knack for it, you can easily get a huge following. As a politician, there's a huge audience readily available to you, and they'll hear the counter positions less and less because they're just going down that funnel more and more. And we haven't really, at least I don't really see anyone knowing how to navigate that. Is that something that the tech companies should solve, or the politicians? But I kind of don't trust either entirely with that, with a problem of that magnitude. So. Unfortunately, no, the Netherlands have not been spared from that either. Yeah.
Well, this has been so interesting. I think that a lot of the challenges are a lot more similar than I expected,
Yes.
Between the different countries, and the struggles are similar. And yeah, I think being a teacher is just hard no matter what country you're in. And kids, I think especially this generation, they're a bit of a challenge no matter where they are in the world. But I definitely do agree, for people that feel called to stick with education, that it can be really rewarding. And there's a huge need for good mentors for young people, just like you were saying, with all the crazy, figures that become famous. It's like kids definitely need good role models. So my applause goes to anybody that is teaching right now, because I just think it's probably one of the hardest eras ever to be a teacher. So I hope that you keep enjoying being a teacher, and that you keep getting more confident with your teacher persona, everything. I know it is so hard and it takes a long time, so, but it sounds like you're doing a great job, and it sounds like you're learning from all of the obstacles that you've overcome, for sure. So.
Yes, I would recommend everyone who's in education right now to stick with it, because this generation really needs it. So yeah, don't prioritize self-care. So make sure that if you're going to stay in teaching, that you are able to do it in such a way that it's not too much of a sacrifice, that you maintain clarity on why you're doing it, and try to live up to your best, yourself, the ideal teacher that you would like to be. Never lose eye of that. And always seek support of your colleagues, because things like like this podcast can be very encouraging, and encourage other teachers to know that they're, the problems. It's not that you're a bad teacher. We're all facing these things. Let's seek support. And one thing that I would like to add, and this really helped me as I was still learning it, it's also good to have someone in your life, whoever that may be, who you can just share your day with. Like, just talk about what you want. They don't even have to give advice necessarily, but if they're there for you to listen, and because it's easy to, if you don't have someone like that, to lose the self-confidence and perspective and just give up. But, if you have someone by your side, or, doesn't have to be a teacher, just can be someone who does something completely different, to just morally support you. I think that's very important. So it's a spiritual practice. It demands a lot of you as a person. So don't ever be disheartened when you had a bad day, or if you a bad week,
or a bad year.
Year. No, absolutely. So all the teachers out there, please stick with it, because the country needs you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Kramer. This has been so fun. And I think that everybody that hears this is going to be just like really encouraged to hear the conversation and hear how teachers are doing all around the world.